Hi everybody, over the course of the last few weeks, we have looked at card choices and how to play in a deck tech of Mono Black Midrange in Pioneer. We've looked at how to sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks with Mono Black Midrange. We've looked at different builds and flax slots within it, and nuances and play patterns within the deck. I can't talk. Oh my god. So here's a combination of all of those things in one giant deep dive in the deck. Enjoy. So this is Mono Black Midrange. Now the overall strategy of this deck is that it's attacking on two different axes. Number one is that it's a pretty solid mid-range deck. It's running Hand Destruction and Duress and Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, Shieldred's Edict, Go for the Throat, and so it's looking to do the same thing as Mono Black in that it's 1-for-1 in the opponent out of the hand and on the board. Just instead of Fable the Mirror Breaker, we have Unholy Annex, where you draw a card at the end step of your turn, and you lose 2 life unless you control a demon, and you can pay 5 mana for Ritual Chamber to unlock that room to get a 6/6 black demon, so it kind of combos with itself, and we're running another demon as well. And so it has that really sweet mid-range plan, but it also has sort of a Splinter Twin thing going on in that it can just win. Between Unstoppable Slasher and Bloodletter of Aklazotz is probably how you pronounce it. Unstoppable Slasher is a 3-mana 2/3 death touch. And when it deals damage to a player, they lose half their life rounded up. So if my opponent's at 20, I jam, deal 2 damage to them, they go to 18, trigger Unstoppable Slasher, they go to 9. When Unstoppable Slasher dies, if it has no counters on it, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with 2 stun counters on it. So it's really hard to answer as well without exile removal. Now, this combos with Bloodletter of Aklazotz, which they 2/4 flying for 4 mana. If an opponent would lose life during their turn, they lose twice as much life instead. Twice of half is whole, so if you have a Bloodletter and you connect with Unstoppable Slasher, you just win. And you can do this reasonably easily because you can get things out of the way with the removal spells, and make sure they don't have removal spells with their Hand Destruction or have blockers with the Hand Destruction, just win. So you can play this mid-range game with the rest of your deck while making them fear this just win combo that the mid-range game is actually really good at doing. As far as other cards in the deck, Castle Lothwain lets us continue drawing cards. Field of Ruin deals with problematic man lands and stuff that would block Unstoppable Slasher. Hive of the Eye Tyrant is great graveyard hate and, again, alternate win condition since we're kind of a control deck as well. Same thing with Mutavault. A whole bunch of swamps. A Takamuma just because it's free, we can get things back from the graveyard. And an Urborg to kind of make up for these colorless lands. Now we're running a playset of both Hand Destructions. The main deck for Duress is, again, mostly to get rid of removal spells out of our opponent's hand and just try to make it so we can combo much easier. And for Thoughtseize, and also Duress is just very good right now as well. For Fatal Push, obviously, it's just the best removal spell in the format, along with Go for the Throat and Shieldred's Edict. Shieldred's Edict noticeably being able to answer Planeswalkers really cleanly. 2 Reckoner Bankbuster just to draw us more cards in addition to the Unholy Annex that we already talked about. Graveyard Trespasser as a great mid-range card and additional graveyard hate. And Invoke Despair, which is very, very good against the enchantment decks, but also just insane against control and mid-range, and just gets us really, really far ahead and advances the mid-range plan really dramatically. I can speak. It's fine. So the main deck is really straightforward as long as you understand that combo. As far as the sideboard goes, we have 2 cut down for these aggressive decks, just as mostly as Fatal Push 5 and 6. Costet Bronco is, again, it's kind of a Dark Confidant equivalent. We're siding this in against control and mid-range decks and really any deck that we can't rely on the combo against, especially decks that we don't really care about our life total. Go Blank, very good against Phoenix and control and whatnot. Shieldred is just very, very good against aggro. Decent against control, and it's just like an additional threat. Additional Evoke Despair, which we've already talked about. March of Wretched Sorrow is a really good additional removal. It noticeably gains life, and we can exile a bunch of black cards from our hand in order to cast it. So gaining a ton of life against like the aggressive red-black deck or whatever is very good. Miko Massacre is a great board wipe. Also just happens to, the trigger on the enchantment also just happens to be very good against Sack. And Unlicensed Hearse is our dedicated graveyard hate. By the way, if you'd like to learn more about this deck as a whole, I did a deck tech on it that was posted last week. You should definitely check that out. Today, we're just focusing on the sideboard. So let's talk about like the roles of the cards in the sideboard first, and then we'll talk about how to sideboard against the top 10 decks. So cut down, we're bringing in against mostly aggressive decks, just things that they against decks that like you can target a bunch of creatures with. Unlicensed Sources are graveyard hate. Caustic Bronco is really good against decks that are going to go very long, and it's really important that we draw more cards then, so think like blue-eye control and stuff like that. Go Blank is very good as like sort of like a mass graveyard hate against things like Izzet Phoenix, but also just genuinely good against cards that like, or decks that like Mind Rot would be good against. Shieldred's decent against decks that draw a bunch of cards, just as like an additional threat. Invoke Despair, very good against these enchantment decks, but also similar to Caustic Bronco, really good against decks that are going to go long, and it's important that we have like big swingy cards that do a lot of things for us all at once. March of Wrath and Sorrow, very good against these aggressive creature decks, or really creature decks as a whole. Also being able to deal with planeswalkers in black is pretty powerful, but outside of like Shieldred's Edict. And then Meat Hut Massacre is our board wipe of choice, but also that enchantment is very good against decks that like Jund Sacrifice and things like that. So let's start with Izzet Phoenix. Against Izzet Phoenix, we're bringing in Unlicensed Hearse, obviously, just as the graveyard hate. We're bringing in Go Blank, just as the mass graveyard hate, and also Mind Rot just is good against the deck. And we're bringing in Shieldred. Now, against the new versions of Izzet Phoenix that are playing Artist Talent, Fatal Push gets just very bad, in my humble opinion. And we're going to shave one Invoke Despair. We just need our things. We just need to be able to double spell to be able to provide as many threats as possible. And this is how I sideboard against Izzet Phoenix. The second most popular deck is Rakdos Midrange. Against Rakdos Midrange, we're going to be providing as many threats as possible and as many cards that do more than one thing as possible. Invoke Despair is one of the best cards we can be playing against Rakdos Midrange. And we're going to be doing our best to cut as many hand disruption spells as possible, because very often we're just going to end up in a top deck war in this matchup. So we're bringing in Caustic Bronco. I know they have a lot of removal, but we just need as many threats and to outcard our opponent as much as possible. And actually, I'm a fan of Shieldred as well. And we're just going to cut as much of our hand destruction as possible and provide as many threats as possible just to be able to outcard our opponent. We do not want to draw one of these cards when we're top decking in the late game. That is the scariest thing on the planet. So that's how I sideboard against Rakdos. And also, actually, how I sideboard against Mono Black as well. Which is the 5th most popular deck. So this is the 2nd and 5th most popular deck. This is how I sideboard against Rakdos, and the mirror match against Mono Black. The 3rd most popular deck is Rakdos Prowess. We're going to be bringing in our cut downs, obviously. Bringing in our Shieldred, just nice to draw cards, a decent blocker, etc., etc. March of Wretched Sorrow is also excellent, and then Meat Hut Massacre. And we're going to be taking out cards that kind of take a while to get going and might deal damage to ourselves. I'm not a fan of Reckoner Bankbuster. And then I like shaving a combination of Unholy Annex and Thoughtseize. Just because Unholy Annex kind of takes a while to get rolling. However, if you do have a demon, it's so good. And the Thoughtseals deals damage to us, but also we can kind of stop them from comboing us. So it's a give and take. This is how I sideboard against Rakdos Prowess. Against Selesnya Company, we're bringing in our cut downs because it deals with pretty much every creature in the deck. Bringing in March for similar reasons. Meat Hut Massacre is a great board wipe. But because of things like Aven Interrupter, I'm really worried of like spending too much mana on a spell. So we're going to get rid of Invoke Despair. And then we're going to get rid of Reckoner Bankbuster. It's because I want to have all of these threats and removal spells as much as possible and just attack it that way. So this is how I sideboard against Selesnya Company. We've already talked about Mono Black Midrange when we talked about Rakdos Midrange. We're sideboarding the same. So the 6th most popular deck, because Mono Black Midrange is 5th, is Mardu Greasefang. Against Mardu Greasefang, we are bringing in Unlicensed Hearse, obviously. We're bringing in Go Blank as that mass graveyard hate that we were talking about. March of Wretched Sorrow is decent as instant speed removal for Greasefang if we really need it. And the Mardu version is kind of interesting because it's sort of a mid-range deck as well. So I actually like bringing in Invoke Despair, just to be able to like win on the mid-range side, you know, as easy as possible. That being said, because it's a mid-range deck that can kind of deal with our stuff reasonably well, and also we have to be wary of the combo, I like siding out of our combo and sort of just playing against them at face value, drawing a bunch of cards and whatnot. So I just side out of a bunch of our combo cards. I think that's totally fine. We have plenty of threats, you know, in the last Unstoppable Slasher, in Graveyard Trespasser, in Reckoner Bankbuster, in and of itself, in Mutavault, Hive of the Eye Tyrant, the other side of Unholy Annex. I think it's totally fine. So I sideboard against Mardu Greasefang. Blue-White Control is the 7th most popular deck. Against Blue-White Control, we are bringing in Caustic Bronco just to draw a whole mess of cards. We are bringing in Go Blank because Mind Rot is good against control. We're bringing in Shieldred because Shieldred is just additional threats are decent against control, and Invoke Despair. We're going to be bringing out a whole ton of our removal. We're bringing out the Fatal Pushes. We're going to be bringing out Bringing out the Go for the Throats. It's really hard to get the combo going in general, so I like cutting 2 Bloodletters, and then I'm also going to cut a single Graveyard Trespasser. They don't do a ton of targeted removal. Being able to exile a Memory Deluge is kind of nice. But anyway, this is how I sideboard against Blade Control. The 8th most popular deck is Jund Sacrifice. We need that Graveyard Hate and Unlicensed Hearse. And go blank. I like March to be able to deal with the relevant creatures like Ygra and Mayhem Devil and stuff like that. And then Meat Massacre, decent against the deck as a whole, but also very good as like just on the enchantment side. Going to be bringing out Invoke Despair because they just have so many permanents. Very rarely do we actually get to hit the thing that we want. Going to be bringing out Fatal Push just because it doesn't really do anything. I mean, it can deal with a Goblin and deal with a Blood Tithe Harvester, but in most situations, like, that's it. And this is how I sideboard against Jund Sack. Against Lotus Field, against Hidden Strings, you know, whatever you want to call it. We're bringing in our Go Blank, because Mind Rod is good against these combo decks. Shieldred, because this is very good against Pour Over Pages. And that's all we really want, but there's a lot of cards we need to take out. Like the Fatal Pushes need to come out. We really don't want the removal as well. It's good against like Lear or whatever, or if they're playing the strict Proctor version, it's decent against that. I'm not super interested in that though. Like I'd rather attack the hand. So we're going to try to bring in cards that are decent, or at least better than those cards in the main deck. So we bring in the Caustic Broncos, and I actually like the Unlicensed Hearse. So we're going to shave an Invoke Despair so we can bring in the second Unlicensed Hearse. So that's how I sideboard against Hidden Strings, Lotus Field, whatever you want to call it. The 10th most popular deck is Rakdos Transmogrify. So this is another great example of a deck that has a decent mid-range plan, but a scary combo. Thing is, if they're playing Valgavoth or whatever, however you say the name, Invoke Despair is excellent against it because it doesn't have to target it. But we essentially have to sideboard against it like it's a like a mid-range deck. That being said, not a big fan of Fatal Push. I would very much rather just attack the hand. I like the rest of this, all very good against these, you know, these mid-range decks. So I like bringing a Shieldred just as additional things. Very good against things like Unholy Annex. And we'll just bring in a Go Blank for funsies. So sideboard against Rakdos Transmog. These are the non-flex slots in Mono Black Midrange. You talk about all of these cards in the deck tech that I posted a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to do that again. But these are the cards you need to play. So notice there are only 51 cards in the main deck and 5 cards in the sideboard that you really need to play, which means there are 9 flex slots in the main deck and 10 flex slots in the sideboard. Let's talk about what you can play in those flex slots. So these are the cards that you can play in those flex slots. So let's talk about that. So again, out of these 20 cards, you're going to be selecting 9 cards to put in the main deck. And out of these 19 cards, you're going to be selecting 10 cards to put in your sideboard. And then you have built your customized Mono Black Midrange deck. So main deck Duress, up to 2 main deck Duress is decent in these flex slots. Where you have an opponent reveal their hand, choose a non-creature, non-land card from it, player discards that card. It's really good, just additional enchantment hate, really good against removal since we don't play a lot of creatures. Very good against like combo and control and all of that stuff. Reckoner Bankbuster is a 2-mana vehicle. It turns into a 4/4 with crew 3 and enters with 3 charge counters on it. We can pay 2 mana and tap it to remove a charge counter from Reckoner Bankbuster and draw a card. And then when there's no charge counters on it, you get a 1/1 pilot that can crew vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. We're mostly playing this for the card draw and the threat in the later game. We'd be playing Reckoner Bankbuster if we think we're going to be playing against a lot more mid-range and control and kind of slower games. Blade of Naoni has been a recent innovation. It's a 2-mana 3/1 with Menace. And we can reconfigure and just equip it to something or have it become a creature by paying 4 mana. And the equipped creature has base power and toughness 5/5, has Menace, and is Black Demon in addition to its other colors and types. The reason this is good in this deck, let me go back to the no flex slots, is if we attach it to an Unstoppable Slasher, it becomes a 5/5 with Menace, so it's even harder to deal with, which means we can get through more often and, like, you know, be able to trigger Unstoppable Slasher. Also, it's a demon, which means that it turns on Unholy Annex, which is just very powerful. And it's like decently sized, kind of annoying to deal with, applies a decent amount of pressure, is hard to block by itself as well. A Go for the Throat just as reasonably unconditional removal. Shieldred's Edict allows us to more easily deal with Planeswalkers in Mono Black, but also removal for other stuff. It's pretty diverse. Graveyard Trespasser is Graveyard Hate we could play in the main deck. Archfiend of the Dross, some people are playing just to lean more into the demon package with Unholy Annex. Shieldred is slowly falling out of favor. It doesn't fit in with the demon package, but its triggers are still really powerful against aggressive decks and decks that draw a lot of cards. The issue is the reason this is falling slowly out of favor is that a lot of the decks that draw a lot of cards, like Treasure Cruise decks, are also playing Lightning Axe, which deals with Shieldred and doesn't deal with other stuff cleanly. But you could play 2 Invoke Despair in the main deck. Again, that's very good against these slower decks. It allows us to deal with some things that might be hard for black to deal with while also drawing a bunch of cards. And March of Wretched Sorrow, very good against aggressive decks, is black and X. And exile black cards that make it cost 2 less for each card exiled. And it deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, you gain X life. So really good removal for these aggressive decks if we want to pad our life total. So you want to be selecting 9 of these cards to be playing in your deck. As far as the sideboard goes, remember there are 10 flex slots in the sideboard. Cut Down is good against these aggressive creature decks. We've already talked about why you'd play Duress. Anoint with Affliction, very good against other unstoppable slasher decks. Also a decent removal against these creature decks that can't be ruined with a pump spell like Cut Down can. Go Blank is really good alongside its Mind Rot effect, but it's excellent when the graveyard matters as well. So like against Phoenix, being able to exile the graveyard is powerful. Really good against Lotus, etc., etc. Withering Torment is black's targeted enchantment hate. Also decent against creatures, but we have better creature removal. We'd want to play it for enchantment hate. Cry of the Carnarium, 3 mana. All creatures get -2/-2. Just decent board wipe in black for it's really cheap. Liliana the Veil, you'd be playing against mid-range or control decks, both for the discard and being able to answer like one powerful card that their opponent is playing. Path of Peril, another cheap board wipe, destroying all creatures with mana value 2 or less. The reason you might play Cry of the Carnarium over Path of Peril is the Selesnya Company deck. Most of their creatures cost 3 but have 2 or less power, so Cry can answer more of the creatures, but Path of Peril is much cleaner against the black-red decks. We've already talked about Shieldred. The End is kind of a cute card. Unconditionally exiling target creature or planeswalker, and then you get to extract that creature or planeswalker. I think it's just powerful if there's a creature or planeswalker that the deck is like really heavily leaning on, like a Wandering Emperor deck or the Mirror Match or something. I've already talked about Invoke Despair. Mayhem Massacre is a very good board wipe against these aggressive decks, but also the enchantment itself is very good against cards like, or decks like Jund Sack. And we can play additional graveyard hate, even though Unlicensed Source is already in our needed cards, if we think we're going to be playing against more graveyard decks. So again, you are going to be selecting 9 of these 20 cards to be adding to your deck, and 10 of these 19 cards, as far as flex slots go, to add to your sideboard to join these cards in your Mono Black Midrange deck. First off, and I've mentioned this a million times, the Slasher Bloodletter combo. If you have Bloodletter on the battlefield and you connect with Unstoppable Slasher, you just win the game, because Bloodletter doubles the amount Unstoppable Slasher makes their opponent lose off of the trigger. Unstoppable Slasher says the opponent loses half life, and double half is in fact whole. It is a Splinter Twin combo. You just win. Speaking of Unstoppable Slasher, it can be kind of difficult to do the Unstoppable Slasher math. At least it like racks my brain a little bit. So the way Unstoppable Slasher is worded is they lose half their life rounded up. For some reason, my brain decides like, okay, it's 13, right? Half of 13 is 6.5. So they should end up with 7 life because it's rounded up. That's not actually how it works. They lose the amount of life rounded up. So half of 13 is 6.5 rounded up to 7. That's how much they lose from 13. So they end up at 6. For some reason, it's really hard to wrap my brain around. And I just felt like it was important to mention because there have to be other people out there like me that for some reason have a hard time with Unstoppable Slasher math. Some versions of Mono Black Midrange are playing Heartless Act. It's important to remember with Heartless Act that if your opponent plays Archfiend of the Dross, you can remove counters of it with Heartless Act and kind of just win the game, because when they untap, the upkeep trigger makes them lose. Unholy Annex cares about demons and allows you to drain 2 life rather than lose 2 life when Unholy Annex triggers on your end step. Remember that Mutavault is a demon. You don't necessarily have to have any of your normal demons on the battlefield. You can activate Mutavault, maybe even with itself, to make sure that you drain off Unholy Annex if you don't need the mana, obviously, Also, Heartless Act doesn't care what kind of counters they are. So Heartless Act, while is a very good removal spell, you can also target your own Unstoppable Slasher with it to remove the stun counters so that you can untap with Unstoppable Slasher even at the end of your opponent's turn, and they might not expect an attack from Unstoppable Slasher if you like remove the counters and are able to untap with it, and you can catch a lot of opponents by surprise. Heartless Act is very good in this deck. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.